We're good. We're recording. So I'm going to show you once again. This is the project that we're going to be working on today. It is my own design called the Peruvian bird. It's got a bunch of different colors. I'm going to have a light here so you can kind of see the colors that it shines. Red, blue, a bunch of greens. And yeah, so we're going to be putting this guy together. I've already made a few of them prior to this so that we have examples and things that we can work towards. Here you can tell this is kind of like my workspace for when I'm soldering. We have a bunch of little tools here that we'll be using during the process, as well as the little jar and this little brush for flux and some temperings. Okay, so you see here we have some pre-cut already. I would like to perhaps work with this one. We are going to cut a piece. So I give you all the option here to choose if you want a wing cut, if you want one of the body cuts, or if you want maybe one of the tail feathers cut. So if you would like to see one of these wing pieces being cut, please comment with number 1. If you would like to see the body, comment number 2. If you would like to see the head, comment number 3. So we're doing number 2 then. We're going to be cutting one of these body pieces. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take it out of my pattern so that I have the piece here. And normally I like to use a light box because then that way it makes it easier to see what you're doing. Now we have to select some glass. Here I have a bin of pre-selected glass that I've chosen for this project. It doesn't have to make sense. We're just going to be putting it together. Excuse me, it's kind of hot at my place. We can't use the AC because we had an issue yesterday. So we have, let's see what the options for glass. We have this beautiful fuchsia red looking glass. We have this blue, purple, stylish looking glass. We have this like conglomerate of colors. I think this was made by a.k.a. It's got a bunch of different colors. That one seems to be liked. So we're gonna put it forward here. And another option of glass that I have is this orange yellowish looking glass color. So I mean, I feel like you'll already pick this one because this one had a bunch of likes on it already. So we're gonna use this one. Yeah, look at that. Choices. Okay. Let's put everything back so that we don't have glass hanging around that can break and cut ourselves. And then we're going to proceed with how to cut something. So normally I want to put my glass, the one that I'm going to be using, on the bottom. A thing that we need to learn about glass has a texture sometimes. When they make it, it depends on who makes it. Sometimes they roll it. So when it comes out, it's on a flat surface, and then that way you can have a flat end to work on. Or sometimes they're like handmade and hand stretched, which makes it more bumpy and more textured. So this specific glass, we have quite a bit of texture on both sides. So it doesn't really matter where we cut it. Normally you want to cut on a side that has the least texture. Another thing too is that glass has movement in the color, and you can kind of tell how things are kind of like going this way in the glass. They're like moving that way. So we can use the movement in our design. This piece that I had selected has the movement flowing down from it. So I'm going to try to get that down movement into this piece. I feel like that would be a pretty good spot for it. There's a lot of tools required for stained glass, y'all. It is not a cheap medium, mostly because things are not cheap and you need to collect a bunch of stuff for this. So I'm going to use this Sharpie. It's got a ultra fine point tip. I find it's important to get as close to my design piece and my pattern piece so that when I cut it, I get as close to it. It just makes it easier to work. So I'm going to start here on one end, and I'm gonna just trace my piece. Very simple. Let's do the other piece here. And then my front. All right. And you can kind of see, well, not really, maybe if I bring it closer. You can kind of see my drawing there, my pattern on the lines. So we're gonna try to get this guy cut. In order to cut glass, you kind of want to stand up because that way you have good pressure coming down into the glass. I'm gonna use my specialized cutter, aka the Toyo cutter, the custom grip. I like it because it fits right here in my hand and I don't have to hurt myself a lot when it comes to breaking. In fact, you shouldn't be hurting yourself when you're breaking glass. Glass breaking should be, or at least glass scoring should be enough pressure so that you cut the surface tension of the glass face. You shouldn't be having to do too much for it. Another thing to keep in mind too, glass has an order of operations, meaning glass wants to be cut a specific way. I tend to do inside curves and inside cuts first before I do outside cuts in order to help my glass survive the final breaking pieces. So I'm just gonna come right here. In order to cut glass, you want to come down, straight down from one edge to the glass and then work all the way until you get to the other end. And then I lift up like an airplane. So you'll see when I cut. And then you also want to kind of practice your cut to make sure that you can make the movement in one go and you're not stopping or lifting because consistent pressure is super important when you're breaking glass. So we're going to start here. You see that how it just comes down? That's all the pressure I need. And I'm going to slowly guide. And then when I get here to the end, I'm going to take off like an airplane. And that's it. The glass is scored. You might say, wait a minute, is that really going to be enough to break the glass? You know, we'll find out. But the answer most likely is yes. We have tools to break glass. This one is called a running plier. You know the running plier because of two elements. One, there is a line on it. That's important. And two, there is a screw on it as well. It looks like this to the side. Now, the point of the line in here is you want to line up the line of your running plier with the line of your score. And this is important because if you're not doing that and you don't tell the glass how to break, the glass will choose by itself how to break and it's not going to go the way you want it. So you want to guide it and you want to tell it where to go. Another thing is the screw. The screw gives you the thickness of the glass. So if you come into any side of the glass and you tighten the screw to the point that it's tight but not like super tight, then we have the height of the glass ready. And then we can proceed with breaking. So I'm going to line up my line here. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, you can see the score line. Can you see that score line right there going? Whoop? So I'm going to line up the line with my score line. And I like to put my fingers right here on the place where it could break weird. And you just want a slow squeeze, not too much, just a little bit. Okay, we need to loosen up the screw a little bit more. Just a slow squeeze, see if we can hear a break. And of course, it broke the other way. Sometimes when glass has different texture, it just likes to not follow. You see, look, see where a break was? And then it decided to go, bloop. Yeah, it's totally okay. So what I'm gonna do, because this is learning, I'm going to redraw my pattern, because why not? We have time. So I'm gonna redraw it here. We try our best. Sometimes glass doesn't want to cooperate. But this way it will be a little nicer because my break is a little smaller and then I can show you a different tool. Okay, so I'm gonna score the glass real quick. Sweet. And then we're gonna use these breakers. These are called the breaker grocers. They kind of look like the head of a alligator almost. You want the flat side to be on top and the rounded side to be on bottom, and that's very important. Make sure my hands are not sweating because in order to make this break, you see it's not a lot of glass, it's just a little bit that we want to remove. I'm going to use the breakers. And the technique here is a little different than what we've been doing because we don't have to line up everything. I want to bring the pliers as close to my break as I can. Then I want to hold onto the glass really closely like this. And I want to try to pull them apart. See that? It came off. We still got some areas here, so we're going to grab and pull it apart. You got one more area over here. Grab, pull apart. And there we go. We have our cut piece. So let's continue with the other cuts. I'm going to go with this one over here. All right. So we have our score here on the glass. You can see it is going around this whole area. And I'm going to run the running pliers, line up my line with the line, and a little bit of pressure. All right, we got one break. Let's continue it through. And a hold for pressure. And we got a couple of little bits over here that didn't want to come out. So this is part of the it's not an issue, it's more like the intricacies of texture glass because you want the cut to be or the pressure to be as consistent as possible. And sometimes little bumps on the glass make it really impossible to get consistency, but we do our best. All right, let's check it. That's pretty close. So let's go ahead and do our third and final cut here. And from one side, consistent pressure throughout. Ugh, I didn't like that empty here. That is sounded so weird. All right, line up the line with my brake. Slow pressure. And boom, it came out in one. How nice. So now we have the piece. Look at that. We got, they're like twinsies. Yay. And now what do you do after you cut the piece? That is a great question. We have to grind it. But before we grind, let's get rid of some of these dangerous areas because I really don't want to cut myself. I am using a waffle board underneath, as you can tell. The point of the waffle board is so that it catches the glass and it doesn't end up on your hand. It's a very, very nifty invention. I do not waste any glass. I love to work specifically with scraps just so that. Thank you, Maris. I've been doing this for a few years, so I make it look a little easier. It's quite a bit of work. As grinding can be a very messy process, and I don't necessarily expect you to deal with water and things like this. So I'm gonna bring my piece here. I'm gonna plug in. Also, that's another thing. This medium is requires a lot of tools. It's not cheap, but if you start collecting the tools early enough and you buy things used, it makes things a little cheaper. Right. So we have our grinder here. We have the piece inside. And one thing you always want to do is you want to add water. Grinding glass without water is just like breathing in glass dust, which is very unhealthy. You do not want to do that. Water makes it so that the dust gets collected and it goes into one spot. Oh yeah, 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 yeah. This is literally a tub that I just cut out. It's so ghetto. I just cut out the front of it, and then I put these pieces of cardboard on the end so that the kind of broken edges don't just cut you. Anyway, so we're gonna turn on the grinder. I have a pedal for it because I'm fancy like that. So you press it down, and then it's running. And then what you want to do, this is very important because glass, as soon as you break glass, glass is ready to cut you, right? I'm actually going to show you here because it's a good example. You see the edges of this glass, how they're got those sharpy ends. If I was to just run my finger through it by mistake, it would slice me. So instead of hurting ourselves, we're going to use my first technique for grinding, which is a quick grind all around. So I'm going to take it and I'm going to run it along the edges really quickly. All right, that should be enough. And then that makes it so that now I can handle the glass without the fear of hurting myself. First thing I want to do is I want to take care of those big little dimply bumpy areas. You want to make sure that the glass is nice and smooth throughout the edge. All right, that's one side. For the other side here. So when it comes to grinding, you can spend all day grinding your piece, or you can be a little smart about it because, like I said, these tools are not cheap. So um, I don't like to be grinding for too much. I like to cut my piece as close to my line as possible and then grind just enough to make it nice and smooth and ready for the next step, which is foiling. If you're going to be grinding a piece forever, you're going to be replacing grinder bits like no one's business. And ain't nobody got time for that. All right, Amaris, I know for some jobs it's not recommended to wear gloves. Is the same case for this? You know what? Yes. I I had gloves at first when I was working with this, and I like to feel the glass. I like to feel what's happening. I like to feel for bumps, and gloves make it so that you can't feel nothing. And yeah, no, and I need to be able to feel what I'm doing. I'm gonna unplug. I'm gonna take the grinder out of here, and then I can show you the piece. After we've cut it and we've ground it, that's what it looks like. Look at that. It should look pretty much the same as the other one that we cut. Yeah, they're like twinsies. Yay. All right. So you've cut the piece, you've ground the piece. What do you need to do next? You need to clean it. And then I'm going to dry it with my little towel because you always want things to be fully dry before we continue to the next step. Now that we are ground, we have our piece nice, ground, and clean. We need to move on to foiling. The question now comes into what type of foil do we want to use? There are different types of foil depending on the different projects. So this right here is an example of what they call black coated copper foil. So it is copper on one end and it's black on the other on the adhesive side. You would use this for projects when maybe your glass is kind of dark or when you are going to be using patina at the end of your project to turn the solder into black, because then that way you won't see the silver or the copper inside the glass after you foil or after you finish your design. I am a bit of a crazy person, so I like 316 foil, though I'm thinking for this project that might be a little too small. Actually, that works. So this is 316 silver foil. It is copper on one end and it's silver on the other. I like to use this one mostly because it saves you for having to use patina because solder is silver anyway. So if you're not going to be patinaing the piece and you just want to keep it in silver, use silver coated foil. There is also copper foil, regular one, that is copper on the inside, like this example. I am not using this one, so this is just to show you. Is you want to line up your piece to the foil. I like to start at one end that maybe has not too many curves, and I want to start about an inch away from the edge. And I'm gonna rip this out here. It's really easy to rip, so you have to be careful too with how you're using your foil. So I'm going to line up the foil, try to be in the middle of my piece. I don't know if you can see how I did that, but you see how it's kind of in the center, and then you want to pinch the edges down. This allows it so that it becomes part of the piece. And you might want to try and have about the same distance on both ends. So then that way you have a nice, good connection. After you've done one end, then you can proceed. There's a couple of techniques here that I have seen people use. One is called the inch and pinch, or at least that's what they called it. You do a little inch at a time, you press your finger down on the back, and then you pinch it closed. That one is a good technique, but it takes too long for my liking. I like to do the whole edge at once. So that's what I'm gonna do here. I'm just gonna run along the whole edge. And then once it's placed, then I'm gonna use my finger and I'm gonna run it along the spine of the glass so that the foil can start coming down into place. And then once it's down, then I pinch it. And then the whole side is done. Inside curves are a little different. So instead of doing it so far, I'm just gonna do what we've been doing, which is placing it, but I'm gonna leave it alone after I do a couple of runs with my finger, and then we'll come back to it. Then we can finish off here. So I'm gonna do the whole side. And then once I come up here to my end, you want to go back to the place where you started and overlap. And then I'm just gonna break it here with my fingers. It's really easy to break. And then we're gonna do the technique. Gonna run our finger here on the edge until it comes down, and then we're gonna pinch it shut. Coolness. So now we have two sides that have been oiled, but we still need to do this inside edge. So the issue that can happen when you just get started into putting it down into the glass, the copper doesn't like to be bent too much too quickly because it will break, and then you will have areas that are broken and it will make your soldering look terrible. So instead, I like to run my fingers along the edge slowly so that the heat of my finger can get the foil ready to move. And then I pinch it. And there we go. We got all the sides placed. Now, this is not enough though. This is just part one. After you finished adding your foil, you need to do something called burnishing. I have a special tool for burnishing. It is this Anraku stained glass roller. It is a really nice tool that I got ages ago, and it's my main use most likely. You can use like something made out of wood. I have this other specialized little tool, kind of like a pen that people use as well. You can literally use a pencil. If you can find you a fit like this, you can use that as well. This is for leaded stained glass work. We are not getting into that today. But what you want to do is you want to run all the edges of the glass with your burnishing tool. And this is not so much about pressure, it's more about applying heat. So you want to do fast movements so that the heat activates the glue and then it really adheres to the glass. Normally, when you're finishing with the foiling, you could have some places that have little bumps. And again, why I don't wear gloves, because you want to feel everything. And if you feel any bumps, you want to make sure those bumps are gone. So I'm gonna burnish those as well. Okay. Once you've done all the outside edges, we need to do all the faces. So I'm gonna set it down onto the area I'm working on. Another good thing too is try to not burnish on a spot that is not solid, because if you're working on something that's not solid, glass will bend and it could break your piece as you're doing this. So take that with a grain of salt. I'm gonna slowly here use my roller to get this outside bit to burnish nice and well into the face of the glass. I proceed on to the other side and keep going. All right, one side is done. Let's flip it over and do the other. Now, again, this is not about pressure. This is just about heat. So don't worry about adding too much pressure with your hand. Just make sure you're working fast and quick. All right. And then our piece is nice and finished. So now that we have one piece finished, we can go back to our pattern. So the piece that we just finished, I'm going to add it here to the rest of the design. And then boom, we have our design is back, just like that. So this is a thing called gelled flux. It is the flux that I prefer to use. There are things about it that I like, things about it I don't like. I like the gel flux because unlike the liquid flux, it doesn't sputter at you when it gets wet. I mean, when it gets hot. Sometimes when you use the water flux, it's like working with hot oil on a pan, and you put something wet and then it just like explodes at you. So in order for safety, I like to steer away from the wet and go for the gel, because the gel is nicer to use. We're gonna use our beautiful brush here, and this is important because you want to always flux. If you're not fluxing, the solder will not work. What I want to do is I want to attach any of the pieces that are meeting something else. So like here on the head to the body, the wings to the body. So I'll be working on that right now to make sure those are nice and soldered. So the first thing you want to do is you want to add your flux. And what flux is, it is a weak acid that helps clean out the metals. Because as you know, metals like to collect oxygen, or you may not know. So when you're exposing metals to the outside air, they like get oxidized. And this allows it so that the metal is nice and clean, so that when you apply the solder can communicate with it and they can become friends. Otherwise, they will hate each other and you will be really sad about it. I don't need this anymore. Let's plug this guy in. So I am using a Hakko soldering iron. It is an FX601. You can see it here. It's one of those fancy ones where you can set your own temperature. Um, I was given this at work. I was given a few of them actually because it just keeps needing some help, and then just gotta get a new one sometimes. All right. I like to keep my temperature between 360 and 410, right somewhere in the middle. And also another thing that's important when you're working with solder is you want to have something like a stand, and you want to have a sponge that is wet with water in order to keep the head or the tip of your soldering iron nice and as clean as possible. So you want something nice and clean. It's not fully clean. It is whatever. Just make sure that you keep cleaning it. And whenever you're done using the soldering iron, you always put it back on its stand. Just remember the black area and the coils around are going to get hot. So try to not touch that side. Try to just grab it and then put it back. That's literally all you need to do. And then we're also going to be using 60/40 solder. That is 60% lead, 40% tin. And it is a good combination for simple stained glass projects. There are other types of solder like 50/50 that are, it's what it says, 50/50, so it's got more tin and it's got less lead. Things like that may require more heat, so you might want to bring up your heat. Also, when I'm doing repairs, I want to bring up my heat because then that way it can help melt the solder that's like old and oxidized and whatever. Or when I'm doing what's called ornamental soldering, you might want to bring down your soldering temperature so you can pull on it and make other things that normally you couldn't. All right, so my soldering iron is nice and hot. We added flux to these areas. I'm going to show you a couple of different techniques. So one thing that's important is you want the solder to get in between the glass as much as possible. So I'd like to first grab a little bit of solder, just like that. You see how we just picked it up. And then we're going to run it along the edge. And I kind of want to make sure that it's in between. So I'm gonna add just a little more, and I'm gonna get in here, make sure that it's running in between the glass. All right, I'm gonna do this other two really quickly, and then I'm gonna pick it up and show you what I mean by in between, and then we'll move on to the next step of the soldering process. All right, normally at first, you're not too worried about how it looks like. This is one of those mediums that um, it can take you all day to make sure that it's perfect. And it is up to you and whatever your level of perfection is, because not everybody has all day to be working on one thing. I am a crazy person, so I like to spend as much time as possible. All right, so I'm gonna take these guys out. I have this little case for my pins because you don't want pins sticking you later. And I'm gonna pull these pins out. And now we should be able to pick it up, and you can see what I mean by getting in between. So you see, like it's one solid thing, and I only added a little bit of solder to it. If you look at the spots, they look kind of blotchy, but they look flat. And if we look at the other side, you can see some of the solder is seeping through to the other end. That is all good signs because that means that your solder is going to be good. So now that you've done the one, we can proceed with the second step. So always adding more solder, more solder, more flux, and we'll be adding more solder too. So I guess that applies as well. Here's another technique when you're soldering. First, we're going to clean the tip, make sure we have a nice clean tip to work with. And this is the placer solder and solder along the bead. So I like to hold my solder in the place where I want to start. And I'm going to come down into it with my soldering iron tip. And I'm just going to kind of like glide both along the edge and then lift. And that's it. I'm gonna add just a little bit more over here. There we go. Cool. And then we're gonna do this side again. Come down into it. Slowly guide the tip to the end and lift. Cool. Let's go right here. Guide slowly and lift. This side is gonna need more. You can kind of tell as you build that sometimes you need to add more solder. That is totally fine. Just make sure you give enough time for your solder to cool down before you continue, because otherwise it will just travel underneath and then you'll end up with a blotch on the other side. And that kind of defeats the purpose. So we're gonna go in here just a little bit more. Cool. So there we go. We have one nice sided beads on all those ends. So once you do one side, you want to flip it over and do the other side. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna flip it over here. It's not hot. It's still kind of hot. That's okay though. Actually, let's not do that. We're going to move on to my other example. So this is the example of one whole side with all those beaded edges or in between areas on one side of the piece. The other side still needs to be soldered. So we're going to be soldering this one together. Always we need the flux. We're gonna add flux into these areas. You can kind of tell as I add the flux, the copper starts turning a little more shiny than how it was before. That just means that the flux is working and it's making the copper nice and ready for the solder. All right, let's proceed. Start here on one end. To this side. There's another technique called I call it the helicopter technique, where we come down like a helicopter, melt and lift. Yeah. And then come back here. Get some of these tail feathers going. All right. Gonna have to helicopter this way up here. Just a little bit more to this side. And then a little bit more on this side. Ta-da! So now we have both sides solder on this one. I don't ever use a solder wick. I have no need to. Glass doesn't really care about solder as much as glass doesn't care about solder at all. If you put solder on glass, you can just take it off. All right. So now that we've done both sides, we need to proceed with the last bit, which is the outside edges. So I'm going to add my flux here. And we're going to flux all my outside edges. But in order to, and for the interest of time, I'm just going to show you this side as an example, and then we'll move on to my other prepared piece so that you see how it looks like. So, using the magic of television, one thing that you want to do is you want to what's called tinning. And this is when you just add a little bit of solder to foil. So you don't need too much. You just want to kind of like paint it so that instead of being copper, now it's silver. And it doesn't take too much solder to do this, just a little bit, enough so that it's kind of painted on top. Okay, proceed with the tail. See, it's very quick. I don't want to spend too much time on the outside edge either because I don't want to overheat the glue either. What can happen if you overheat the glue, your piece will fall apart later. The foil, I like to think of it like the bones of the piece. It's like an exoskeleton. So if the skeleton is no bueno, then the piece is going to be no bueno either. Gonna add just a little bit more here to these edges. I like to try and beat them as much as possible so that it saves me time on the next step. All right, I only did some of it. You can tell these sides now have solder in them. It's no longer super copper. Now you have outsides of silver. So that's what it would look like after you're completed doing one side. Once you finish one side, you want to do the other side. So here we have one side fully done on all the outside edges. So you want to flip it over now and you want to do the other side to make sure that they all have the same thing. So we're going to proceed again with tinning. I'm going to do just this top side here. And we're going to tin. And then we'll proceed with the outside beading. Oh my goodness, wait a minute. I have no time. So pretend that we did all that already. This is what the final project is supposed to look like when we're getting really, really close to finishing. So we have one side is fully soldered on all the edges. The other side is fully soldered on all the edges. However, my inside is not soldered at all. See how it's a lot of copper still showing. So I'm going to show you another technique. This is called the beading technique. You want to apply flux to the area you want to work on, just like that. And then after we apply the flux, we want to make sure that our solder is somewhere where we can reach it. I like to extend out and then bring it up so that I can just grab it. And then I'm going to use my soldering iron tip, make sure it's nice and clean. And then you want to grab a little bit at a time and you want to add it as it melts. It sounds a little bit more complicated than it is, but it actually is quite complicated. So you're adding a little bit at a time, making sure the balancing act is happening, and then keep adding, keep building until we get to the edge, and then we want to make it look nice and pretty. So we're gonna start back at this side. I'm gonna melt my solder, and then we're gonna just start melting it, but guiding it as we go. See how it kind of wants to move? We're not gonna let it move too much, and we're gonna use our gravity here to make sure it stays in place and it doesn't topple over. All right, and then we have one side beat it. Flip it over. I like to blow on it. Make sure it's nice and cool before I can proceed. Then I'm gonna grab some over here. I'm gonna bead. All right, y'all. I know time is up for the meeting. I probably have 2 more minutes here. Thank you for joining. If you need to get going, I get it. I'm just gonna take this next couple of minutes to add a jump ring and then show you another guide to finish your project, and then we'll be calling this good. All right, so now you see this whole side has been beaded. You have one nice, long, beautiful bead flowing from one end to the other. You want to do that everywhere, right? And then once you're done with all that, then you want to add your jump ring. I have some prepared jump rings here that have been pre-tinned. It makes it a lot easier to work with instead of a metal that won't attach with solder. The push pins or these pins normally have a broken end. I want to solder the broken end into my piece so that it doesn't break later. And I like to use pliers to hold the ring in place. So I'm just gonna show you on this one. This is the piece that we just soldered. Normally, you don't want to apply your jump ring somewhere where the glass is not touching another piece, because what can happen over time, the foil will be pulled and then it'll break and then your piece will be on the floor. You want to attach it in places where glass connects to another piece, like up here, for example. So, first thing you want to do is add flux. I'm gonna flux the heck out of my ring and the heck out of the spot. Then you want to melt a little bit of your iron and you want to just add a little bit of solder to it, not too much. You want to work slowly while you do this because you can run the risk of the solder melting through and then you'll be like doing this for an hour and you'll be like, why is it not attaching? Take your time when you work here. Make sure we're always going back to the bead because beads look really nice to the eye. All right, so you can see this side is beaded in. I'm gonna flip it over and do the other side real quick. All right, I'm gonna helicopter in to make sure this side looks nice and pretty. And there you go. And there we go. Look at that, the jump ring is in place. So now if I was to hang it, it could live forever and it will be good to go. All right, two things we need to talk about before I let you go. So, because we've been working with metals and we've been working with things that are not the best for your hands, I like to use this thing called Quick Clean. And this is a flux remover and patina cancellator. And this works really well to clean out the piece after you've been finishing with your plugs and everything else. One thing I will tell you about it though is glass doesn't like quick changes of temperature. So if you're going to be using quick clean or any other thing to clean, make sure your piece is not too hot. Good rule of thumb, if you can put your fingers on it and not have to move them in like 3 seconds because you're gonna burn yourself and it's good to go. So yeah, this will be good to go for me to just hit it with this, but I'm not gonna do that. Instead, we already showed you the final project. So once you finish with all that, you have this guy. And then this is optional, but I think it's really important. This is a liquid called stained glass finishing compound. It is kind of like a polisher, but more like a waxer. And you want to apply this onto the glass and then wax and polish it so that it retains the shine forever. All right. Thank y'all. I think I have 5 minutes left. So if you have any questions you want to ask me, feel free to write them or just get on and you can ask your question. Ooh, gospel, please go ahead.
Hi. Yes, I messaged you earlier about being a baby beginner with stained glass. So thank you so much for this workshop. This is so fun. Um, I actually have a couple of questions, but I'll probably just DM you most of them because they're quite specific. Uh,
Absolutely.
but my main question is this. So I have a slightly ambitious project in mind. I
Mm-hmm.
want to make a stained glass lamp that is shaped like a camera.
Oh my goodness, I love it.
And well, the camera that I'm trying to recreate, it's already quite like boxy, so I don't think it's impossible. But I haven't
Mhm.
really done even like a complicated like 2D project yet. So my question is, do you think that there is a huge gap between the skill level needed to do a 2D piece versus a 3D piece? Because to be honest, in my mind, like the only difference would be soldering the pieces at an angle, but I could be delusional. So
Right. So you make a really good point. When you're making something 3D, you are making something like five times. So normally you have to think about each phase of what you're making. So if you're making a camera, I wish I had. I think I have paper. So this is another thing that we would do on an intermediate class would be design and then talking about things like this. So like let's say you're gonna have a camera. So first you have to think about how many sides of the project. We have the front side with the lens and the thing. We have the back side with maybe like buttons or whatever. We have the top of it. We have all the outside edges, and you are looking at making all of these pieces individually, like a panel like this. And then, so like just a rough example, right? Like we have like the front of the camera, the back of the camera, one edge, two edge, the top of it, right? So we're looking at maybe about five panels that you have to make. Depending on how hot it's gonna be, I think you might want to consider learning other techniques like lead work, because that way it will make it so that you don't have to solder everything. You can use cane. But yes, you can totally do it. I would definitely suggest doing one 2D thing first, especially like a rectangular piece that doesn't really have too much, because that way you get adjusted to soldering and to cutting and things. Once you do one, keep in mind you have to make like five of them. And then when you solder them, it's as simple as soldering things together. Like we have this guy and we have this guy, and we want to solder them together. So what we're gonna do, and this is, I mean, not exactly right, but we wanna add our flux to the space, make sure our iron is plugged in because I unplugged it. And just to show you, this is normally what you want to do. Once things are connected, you are going to be soldering them together, and they will hold in place after you finish all the soldering. There you go. So look, you want to add here. You want to add the solder. Make sure it's nice and collected, and we're gonna beat it. Always beat it. But look, now you can see it's like together. Like they hold the shape. See that? And you want to do this to all the outsides, then to put them all together, and then that way you end up with your 3D design. Definitely, I will say 3D designs are on the more advanced, complicated, but not impossible. I've made some 3D pieces, and there are definitely some easier ones you can get started with to start thinking about the concept of 3D. Um, let's see. Thank you all everyone for watching. I don't know that I have any other questions, Tammy. It looks so easy. I hope we get to the point I can score and break the glass, only breaking on the score line. The glass is so expensive to keep making mistakes. I know. That's definitely the hardest part. It's just that it's so expensive. All right, y'all. I'm out of time. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for watching. And hopefully we do this again and maybe we can talk about designing something. Bye.